everybody. Jerry McHugh here with the SJIQ here for February 2023. We're so lucky to have Kathleen Sgamma here with us with the Western Energy Alliance. This is your second visit, Kathleen, so it's great to have you on. And I know we're talking about a special situation here this last week with the NEPA court ruling at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So
NEPA is always special, isn't it?
Yeah. So tell me what's going on at the Alliance first. And as a disclosure, San Juan Resources, we are members. So and we appreciate all the work that you and the Alliance do for producers on our behalf in the Rockies and on federal lands especially. So
yeah, well, sure. So we've been deep into rulemakings. Methane rules from BLM and from EPA, which obviously affect everyone, including existing sources. So that comment period just ended. That was a rather Herculean effort to get comments on that. EPA and the BLM did not extend the comment period, even though it was literally hundreds and hundreds of pages in supporting documentation, including buried in there was a social cost of carbon and social cost of methane study that was novel to the regulated community. And so I just got done writing a 25-page paper on that. So that was lovely, on top of our 25 pages of technical comments. So, you know, methane, it's all methane all the time. It has been for years now, right? That's the issue that the environmentalists are really going after. They kind of dropped fracking once those efforts fell flat, literally, from our ability to stop in court federal regulation of fracking. And so it's been all methane all the time. And these rules were the pinnacle for this administration. We're going to see lots of other regulation coming out of the administration. The next up on the docket is the Council on Environmental Quality out of the White House, their NEPA guidance on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Speaking of those two subjects, we're in court defending about 6,000 leases all across the West, including in New Mexico, on the basis of climate change. They've been sued on the basis of climate change. So it's very easy to get a judge to rule that NEPA didn't do enough greenhouse gas and climate change analysis. So that's probably a good segue into this 10th Circuit Court ruling, Jerry.
Right. Well, fracking fell on its face. They're working on methane, and now before we can even get drilling and all, they're going for APDs and blaming it on this NEPA law that I mean, I think from my understanding, it's pretty well defined, but at the same time, they're finding all sorts of loopholes, and they come up with, coming up with litigating or making laws from the judge's bench, which I think is what's trying to happen on this particular case. So in a nutshell, explain what happened on the 10th case, please.
I think that's exactly right. We have a situation where Congress has neither passed a law requiring social cost of carbon or analysis of a carbon budget, or has put any kind of guidelines on greenhouse gas and climate change analysis. And so courts are just interpreting that, and they are ending up setting environmental and energy policy from the bench. So that's what we saw out of the 10th Circuit. This case has been ricocheting between the district court and the 10th Circuit Court since 2012. It now involves 81 different environmental assessments and addenda to those environmental assessments, and a total of 370 APDs in the San Juan Basin, basically. So this ruling is limited to those 81 NEPA documents and the resulting 370 APDs. But the knee-jerk reaction from BLM was, oh my gosh, there's a ruling and not enough greenhouse gas analysis was done. We have to stop everything. Luckily, that didn't last long. The Carlsbad office came out and quickly said, well, we're still processing NEPA. This case only applies to this set of APDs.
And remind me, those APDs go back to 2015, most of them?
I think longer, since the case has been around since 2012.
Okay.
And so those, you know, who knows how old those APDs were, you know, they could have
Right.
been years old even in 2012. And I think most of them are drilled, by the way. And then a few days later, the Farmington office did follow Carlsbad's lead and said, no, yeah, we're still processing APD. So I would ask our member companies if they hear of any APD slowdown due to this ruling, let me know, because we are staying on top of that. But it's really, the court case really involved us, you know, just a set amount of NEPA documents and a set amount of APDs from there. Now, that's not to, I would point out that there is another lawsuit challenging 3,500 leases, 3,500 permits, now up to 4,000 permits in Wyoming and New Mexico, but that's another case. I don't think any of these are going to get a preliminary injunction that would cause any APDs to be stopped. What happens with NEPA, for the most part, is that it doesn't result. I mean, NEPA is a procedural statute. It's supposed to be about analyzing impacts, mitigating them where possible. Nothing in NEPA says just because there are environmental impacts, projects have to stop. NEPA is about disclosing those impacts. So the regular remedy for a court case involving NEPA is just for the agency to go back and do more NEPA. And so that's what's happening with this case as well. 10th Circuit sent it back to the New Mexico court, district court, and the New Mexico district court now has to rule on, has BLM done the corrective NEPA? So it should not affect those permits. Ultimately, it should not affect production off of those permits. Like I said, most of them have been drilled to the best of my knowledge. It's merely about the agencies being forced to do more analysis. And we know what happens with more analysis. You get some paralysis by analysis. BLM is definitely hung up doing a lot of rework on lots of different issues, be them leases or APDs, but they should not actually result in a stoppage of those leases or of those APDs.
At least that's what they tell us. Processing continues, but it could be a lot longer. It could be a little bit longer process. And
absolutely, it's that paralysis, you know, paralysis by analysis. So yes, it's not supposed to hang things up, but it will hang things up, right? It will cause BLM to get shifted off to redoing and reworking old NEPA instead of working on new NEPA so that new projects can go forward. I mean, I'm not saying it's a costless decision, but it should have narrow ramifications. And what the judge ruled was that BLM didn't look hard enough at greenhouse gas analysis, and it didn't look at whether it should do a carbon budget analysis or not. Like I said earlier, nothing passed by Congress says that BLM or any federal agency has to do a carbon budget. So again, it's judges kind of setting policy from the bench, but BLM at least has to go back and explain in their NEPA document, okay, we didn't do a carbon budget analysis for this, this, and that reason. We did this type of analysis. They just have to explain it better. And that's usually the remedy on a lot of these NEPA cases, is just BLM needs to explain it better. So that should be the case with this one as well.
well, in some of the field, at least I work out of the Farmington field office, or at least we use those folks to run our APDs for the Bureau of Land Management. And that's what they've said. Yeah, we'll just do an analysis of greenhouse gases on what they ask us for, and you should have your APD or your lease approved based on that. The lease issuances are another matter, which are a lot of, I guess we call them pale leases, because you can't color the map totally yellow. You bought them, but you don't really own them because you're going through an issue. So one thing I will do for our listeners and viewers is I'll put a PDF of the ruling on the website or on this link. So the introduction is quite interesting if you don't know much about it, because they do explain about NEPA, about rulings, how they're doing this, and how they came to their conclusion, whether you agree with it or not. It's pretty well written. It's good reading if you want to read the first part. So this one, as you mentioned, was narrowness of the complaint. Many of I've talked to a couple operators down there, and they mentioned that. They also mentioned that the cumulative emissions doctrine of that or thing that the BLM is supposed to analyze is really hard to do, because lots of those emissions just they happen quickly and they dissipate quickly. How do these processes, like on some little example like that, how do they get through, and how do they get resolved?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So when BLM's doing greenhouse gas analysis, they're going to discuss scenarios of how many greenhouse gas emissions would come from, development. And they have to make assumptions about what that natural gas or oil is going to be used for. And those assumptions are very conservative usually, which overstate emissions. But I mean, greenhouse gas emissions don't just dissipate. CO2 lasts in the environment for centuries, methane for decades, right? A couple of decades. So it's just merely a matter of doing the cumulative, like how much those emissions combined with existing emissions, that type of thing. So it really should be more of a math exercise. But BLM continues to develop, and we've worked with BLM to help develop a template on how to do that greenhouse gas emissions analysis. But environmental groups are going to sue on it again and again and again, because they take the strategy of throwing everything at the wall, and some of it's going to stick, most of it won't. They will find some judges that will say, yeah, I'm sorry, like we won a case for those record lease sales in New Mexico. We won a case in the New Mexico district because the judge said, yeah, BLM has analyzed greenhouse gas emissions. Well, we lost another case in Montana and Idaho regarding emissions, greenhouse gas emissions on leases in Wyoming, because the judge there said, oh no, more analysis should be done. So it's just a matter of, when is enough analysis? And obviously NEPA doesn't say what that is. And it's really, the judges are just trying to come up with, or, they actually end up setting policy from the bench. So BLM has been working on a programmatic oil and gas greenhouse gas analysis. Comment period ended in December. We don't expect to see the final until the summer at the earliest. But hopefully that method that they come up with will enable them to apply the same type of greenhouse gas analysis for everything, whether it's for an APD or NEPA document. They'll have a method, and it will get sued, but hopefully the courts will finally find that, yes, BLM has been deliberative. They've looked at all the angles. They've looked at cumulative impacts and how do we best analyze greenhouse gases. And so that hopefully will provide the template going forward. I'm not saying it won't get sued. The environmental groups will sue on it, but eventually, judges will have to say, oh, look, they did the analysis. This can't continue to be a constant do loop.
Okay. Well, and I think from your state officials on down, most people really want to get things done. Has the political will at the BLM, for the most part, what you've seen? I mean, from what I've seen from the state on down, it's been really positive. Do you think the political will has been that same way?
Well, clearly, political will at the very top is not there. I mean, we have an administration that, we have a president who promised no federal oil. However, folks at the interior, even those from the environmental left, the appointees from the Biden administration, they want to have something that works. So even though they've slow walked new leasing, even they are working on a template that should be able to be used going forward. So we have the interesting result with the only sales held during the Biden administration were back in June of 2022. They were held in New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana. Utah's got canceled, and Nevada. So they did hold one set of lease sales, even though they're required to do quarterly lease sales. But they did hold one set of sales, and they were immediately sued on the basis of climate change again. Well, BLM told us that, hey, we consider that the greenhouse gas analysis that we did for that sale was the gold standard. And they are willing to defend it in court, and we're proud to stand with them defending that analysis in court. We did intervene in that case, Western Energy Alliance did, to defend that NEPA analysis. And they're using that greenhouse gas NEPA analysis in this programmatic, which I was just speaking about. So that programmatic will enable them to go forward. It will also enable them to apply that greenhouse gas analysis back on about 6,000 other leases that we're defending in court as well. Again, sued by the environmental groups. We're in court defending just about every single lease sale since 2016, all across the West.
So is this now the end game that for NEPA, just sue and figure it out, and there's no law that's going to come from Congress, especially in today's environment. It's more kind of playing gotcha now with the Republicans in there now.
Right.
What is your view on any sort of resolution to NEPA?
It's stopping it. It's not, the House is stopping anything. It's not fixing anything. That's for sure. So I think the resolution is twofold. One, BLM is spending a lot of time doing this greenhouse gas analysis, and I believe that will stand up in court. We've got the DC district that's ruling on most of those leases, or a vast majority of those leases that are held up. And I believe that this court, after getting 3 rounds of litigation from the environmental groups, will finally go, yep, BLM's done enough here. And so that will move things forward. Now, like I said, it's not going to stop the environmental groups from continuing to sue on this stuff. But once we have that ruling from the court, and once we have that good programmatic NEPA, I'm very hopeful that greenhouse gas analysis will kind of simmer down as a route for the enviros to continually attack oil and gas on federal lands. So I'm hopeful about that. I'm also wondering if, this Supreme Court took up the major questions doctrine in West Virginia, the EPA, that decision last summer. I think that as this churn continues on NEPA and on greenhouse gas analysis, I'm hopeful that the Supreme Court will eventually take it up in the next several years. And so that perhaps we can get a ruling that will tamper down on these judges just going off in all different directions. I mean, you look at this ruling, they talked about a carbon budget. Well, not only has Congress not passed a carbon budget requirement, but really the only thing that specifies any kind of carbon budget analysis comes from the IPCC. The internet, what does that stand for? International Panel on Climate Change. It's the IPCC is the gold standard.
It's the UN climate change group.
Exactly. It's the gold standard on
it's the International Political Climate Change Council. That's what some people call it. No, I know that.
On climate change. Anyway, everybody, it's the UN IPCC.
IPCC. Yeah. I got you.
They talk about a carbon budget. But I'm sorry, the IPCC is an international body. It doesn't drive U.S. jurisprudence. So I do hope that the Supreme Court picks another case that deals with some of these climate change issues so we can rein in the lower courts. Not we, but that they can rein in the lower courts. Because, I mean, there just needs to be some clarity on this, because the enviros will sue on climate change until they get an answer of no. They want the result of NEPA to always be, an oil and gas project results in greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, it must be stopped. That's their ultimate goal. Obviously, that's not realistic. So, we need the courts to give better guidance on that.
Well, that's a great rundown, Kathleen. Really appreciate your time. Anything else you would? What sort of advice would you give a small producer like San Juan Resources or some of the others out there, or some of these vendors who are out waiting on rigs or waiting on locations so that they can get drilled out there?
Oh, you mean waiting on leases?
Yes, waiting on APDs. Waiting on APDs.
I would just, it's always, you always have to have a relationship with your BLM field office, right? You have to be in there asking about your permits. hey, I really need this permit by such and such a date. How's it coming? Is there any hang up? Just talk to them. If you find that they're doing something like saying, oh, well, we can't even move forward because of this 10th Circuit Court ruling, let me know. They're not supposed to do that. The ruling is very specific. So we need to know, groups like mine, Western Energy Alliance, need to know when stuff like that is happening, because we can start talking to BLM and say, hey, wait a second, time out. What are you doing here? Some of it is just lack of communication from on high, or, individual employees not understanding the guidance. I think in general, if you have a good relationship with your BLM office, like I know most companies do, they can kind of work through those issues at the lowest level. And that's really the most productive place to do it. But if you do start to see hangups, and if you need any backup, certainly give us a call.
Okay. I know, at least in our case, in the Farmington field office at the BLM, I think they're only 20% were working last year in the office. And I'm not sure that other 80% were, the 80% of the time, if there was any work getting done, because we had APD sitting there, and then suddenly we get, after the first of the year, we get an announcement that, here, you need to do this, you need to do that, and all these things. And so I think after the first of the year, I know the manager of the Farmington field office and some of the state people gave them some support to get some help. I know that that's happened. I heard that there's two natural resource representatives, natural resource specialists that have been brought in from Roswell. They're not full-time in Farmington, but they're getting a lot done, and they have a lot of oil and gas experience. So they are taking some measures to move things along, and it's especially helpful to know that these NRSs have oil and gas experience. So those are the kind of things we need, and just to be in touch with them. I mean, they're not going to answer the phone every time, but right. Sure is helpful to maybe send them emails or just check in, or have your field people check in with them too. So at least that's what I found to be helpful.
Yep, exactly. Got to maintain that relationship. We did notice, there are hardworking, good BLM folks, no doubt. It's just, if you're starting to hear, like, if there's just confusion on guidance, because, this ruling came out, some people and BLM might not know how to deal with it. If you hear those types of issues, we can maybe be helpful in that. I can't always solve the problem of the government and getting the government to do. I mean, like, COVID was the best excuse for government employees not to work for like 2 years. I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but I hate to laugh, but for a while the government didn't even show up in the office. It actually turned out to our advantage somewhat, because for the first year and a half of the Biden administration, they had this very aggressive agenda, but they were so locked down in COVID on themselves that they really couldn't advance much of their agenda. So, it has its pluses and minuses.
And we just hope that things do get turned around. There's some certainty for everybody, that there's not as much uncertainty, that there's more certainty. So that's really the key that we all need in our businesses. Anything else you'd like to add? We'll keep this a good amount of time. Anything else you'd like to add?
Like I said, the White House Council on Environmental Quality is doing NEPA guidance on climate change. We will be heavily involved commenting on that. And we don't expect that guidance to be good. So that might be another one. There's opportunity to raise awareness of how the federal agencies are shoehorning climate change policy into regulation that has no support in Congress. So that's kind of where we're turning our attention to next. But the NEPA never ends.
Are you getting any support from any other associations or organizations that
I mean, NEPA is one of our specialties, so we're doing just fine on that. We'd be happy to have other associations sign on if they wanted to. But
okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Kathleen Sgamma.
My pleasure.
President of Western Energy Alliance. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jim.
We will meet next time, and Thank you all for listening. We'll see you on the next Energy IQ. Jerry McHugh here. Thank you. For over 50 years, Process Equipment and Service Company, or PESCO, has been proudly designing, building, and maintaining production equipment for its customers. Located in Farmington, New Mexico, PESCO sells and services units from across the western United States, from large majors to small independents like San Juan Resources. PESCO is proud to sponsor the Energy IQ, and they look forward to working with you, supporting the San Juan Basin community in any way they can. Whiptail Midstream operates crude oil, natural gas, and water gathering systems in the San Juan Basin to handle growing production from the Manga Shale. With more than 500 miles of well-positioned infrastructure, Whiptail is capable of delivering 38,000 barrels of oil per day, 100 million cubic feet of natural gas per day, while gathering and safely disposing of 8,000 barrels per day of produced water. Whiptail is an energetic and innovative company, is happy to support improving our Energy IQ.